They wheeled me out to the courtyard that morning, right before breakfast. The ocean was still gray, the kind of color that doesn't decide if it wants to live or die. Claire fixed my blanket like a nurse would, gentle, efficient, detached. Ryan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, pretending not to look at me. They told the nurse I'd be staying here for a while. That phrase, for a while, hung in the air longer than the gulls circling above. I knew what it meant. It meant they were done pretending. When the papers were signed, they smiled at each other like people do when a long errand is finally over. She handed the clipboard back to the receptionist. He avoided my eyes. I watched their reflections disappear in the glass door before the lock clicked. The nurse asked if I wanted to unpack. I said no. My life was already in boxes, just not the kind you can open again. From my window, I could see the highway stretching out past the dunes. Their car turned left toward home. My home. I didn't cry, didn't shout. I just sat there, staring at the lamp beside my bed, a cheap bulb buzzing faintly, flickering like it wasn't sure whether to stay lit. That's the moment I realized. They hadn't just taken my house. They'd taken my voice. And if I ever decided to use it again, something in this family would break for good. The first night in that room, I couldn't sleep. The walls hummed with the soft rhythm of ventilators and someone's TV from down the hall. Every few minutes, a cart squeaked past my door, the sound of wheels against linoleum breaking what was left of my pride. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows began to crawl, thinking about the quietness of my own house. The nurse had left the small lamp on my bedside table. It wasn't much, just a bulb inside a frosted glass shade, but when the light flickered, I could almost see the living room we used to share. The same kind of lamp stood by the old couch where Ryan and I would watch the evening news. He used to sit cross-legged on the floor, head tilted toward me whenever a commercial about veterans played. "That's you, Dad," he'd say, proud and certain. I used to smile and tell him it wasn't, but deep down, I liked that he thought it was. The sound of waves outside the window pulled me back. I could hear them rolling against the seawall. Steady, patient, old. That rhythm had been there long before me, and it would stay long after. I took a deep breath and whispered into the half-dark, "You'll outlast this too." Morning came pale and slow. Breakfast was oatmeal and a paper cup of coffee that tasted like tin. Across from me, a man in a blue robe stared at nothing, spoon frozen mid-air. His name tag read, George. When he finally looked at me, he said, "First day?" I nodded. He didn't ask more. In places like this, silence was its own language. After breakfast, a volunteer named June helped me to the garden deck. She talked softly about weather and flowers, the kind of kindness that doesn't need details. I thanked her, and she smiled like she'd heard that thank you too many times before. When she left, I sat by the railing, watching sunlight scatter on the water, and for a moment I forgot where I was. That's when the memory came. The last morning at home before everything turned. I'd been fixing a flickering bulb in the kitchen, the same one that had been blinking for weeks. Ryan was there, scrolling on his phone. "You should let me handle that," he'd said. "You'll hurt yourself." I told him I was fine, but he took the screwdriver anyway. Claire was packing boxes in the hallway, calling it reorganizing. "Dad," Ryan said, not looking at me. "Claire found a great deal on long-term care insurance. It's smart in case something happens." He spoke like it was just paperwork, a small favor wrapped in concern. I remember the smell of burnt dust from the bulb, the way it popped when he twisted it wrong. They called me into the living room later that day. Papers were spread out on the coffee table. Claire's handwriting was neat, highlighted in yellow. "We just need your signature," she said. "It's all for protection." I hesitated, tracing the line where my name should go. Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy but familiar. "You trust us, right?" Trust. That word used to mean something. Back at the nursing home, the afternoon light hit the ocean and spilled through the blinds in stripes. I counted them. 5, maybe 6. Like prison bars made of sunlight. George was napping in his chair, mouth open, dreams somewhere far away. I reached into the small drawer by my bed and took out the only thing they hadn't touched. The old glass bulb from my workshop. It still had a smudge of paint on it. The kind Mary left years ago when she helped me fix the porch light. I turned it in my hand, the metal base cool against my skin. That was the moment I stopped replaying what they'd done and started wondering why they'd done it. Not anger. Not yet. Just a slow burn of understanding. Outside, the gulls screamed over the waves. The lamp on my table flickered again, as if it remembered me. I reached over, tightened it gently, and for the first time since they left, the light steadied. The second week inside that place felt endless. Time had its own shape there, slow, flat, and oddly polite, like it didn't want to disturb anyone's sadness. Every day began with the same gentle knock, the same voice saying, "Good morning, Mr. Anderson." Every night ended with the same ceiling light humming above me, never quite sure whether to shine or rest. I'd count the seconds between its flickers. That sound became the new measure of my patience. From my bed, I could see a strip of ocean framed by the window. The waves always looked calm from a distance. But I'd served long enough to know what calm water could hide. Some mornings, the fog rolled in so thick I could barely see the horizon, and that felt right. I didn't deserve a clear view anymore. I'd signed away everything that gave me shape. The land, the walls, the laughter that used to fill them. The nurses were kind, in the way people are when they don't know your story. June came in every afternoon with her little notebook of reminders. Medication, meals, activities. I nodded through all of them. When she asked if I wanted to join music hour in the common room, I almost laughed. The idea of sitting in a circle with a tambourine while my son redecorated my living room was more than I could manage. That evening, I sat alone by the window and watched the lights blink along the boardwalk in the distance. They were the same color as the old porch lights I'd strung myself the summer Mary got sick. She'd stood barefoot on the steps, holding a cup of lemonade, teasing me for being too careful with the wiring. "You treat every bulb like it's alive," she said. I'd grinned back and told her maybe it was. Looking at those lights now, I wondered if Ryan even remembered that summer, or if he'd painted over it like the rest of our memories. A few days later, June brought me a small stack of mail. She smiled when she handed it over, as if delivering a piece of the outside world. There were 3 envelopes, one from the bank, one from the county, and one from a charity I didn't recognize. I waited until she left, then tore them open one by one. The first was a statement, ordinary enough until I noticed my name was no longer the primary account holder. The second was worse, a deed transfer notice stamped with the county seal. The house on Seaview Road was now legally owned by Ryan and Claire Anderson. The signature at the bottom was mine. My handwriting, my initials. But the paper was wrong. I remembered the insurance renewal form. Short, 2 pages, blue ink. This was 5 pages, black ink, notarized in a county I'd never visited. I set the letters on my lap and stared at them until the edges blurred. I felt something inside me crack. Not like glass, but like old wood giving way. It wasn't anger yet, just disbelief. Sharp, clean, and empty. I must have sat there for an hour before George shuffled in from the hall. He was older than me, sharper than he let on. "You look like a man who's seen the punchline," he said. I glanced up. "What do you mean?" He tapped his temple. "People don't betray you by accident, son. They rehearse it." That night I lay awake listening to the sound of the building settling. Every creak reminded me of footsteps in my old house, the rhythm of Ryan pacing while he planned something he didn't want me to hear. I remembered the day they convinced me to sign those papers, Claire sitting across from me, her tone syrup-sweet. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of." Ryan standing beside her, arms crossed, voice low but steady. "Dad, you've done enough. Let us handle the rest." I'd trusted that tone my whole life. It was the same tone he used as a boy when he'd say, "I didn't mean to break it." The difference was, this time, the thing he broke was me. The following morning, I asked June if there was a payphone nearby. She pointed me to one by the reception desk, though she gave me a look that said she already knew I wasn't calling for small talk. I dialed the number for the county clerk's office and asked for verification on the deed transfer. The woman on the other end hesitated. "Sir, I'm not supposed to discuss private filings," she said. I could hear her flipping through papers anyway. "But yes, it appears your son's name was added 3 weeks ago. You must have had your signature notarized by—" She stopped mid-sentence. "Well, that's strange. The notary on this form passed away last year." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were steady when I set the receiver down. Too steady. That night, I walked the hall until I found the small reading room they called the Reflection Lounge. It was empty except for a half-dead plant and a bookshelf full of donated mysteries. I turned off the overhead light and sat in the dark. Through the window, the moonlight hit the sea in silver lines, rippling like Morse code. If I believed in signs, I'd have thought Mary was trying to tell me something. On my way back to my room, I passed the nurses' station and heard them whispering about me. How quiet I was. How calm. "He's too calm," one of them said. "The quiet ones always are." I smiled to myself. She wasn't wrong. Back in my room, I opened the drawer and took out the bulb again. The paint mark from Mary's hand caught the light from the hallway. I ran my thumb over it and whispered, "You still remember, don't you?" The glass didn't answer, but I could feel its warmth even though it hadn't been plugged in for years. That was the night I stopped being confused. Confusion is a privilege for people who can afford to be naive. I didn't have that luxury anymore. I pulled out a notebook from the side table, the one they gave every resident for reflections. Most wrote grocery lists or half-remembered dreams. I wrote dates, names, notes from the phone call, details that might seem small to someone else but could hold the weight of truth. I labeled the first page, "Evidence in case memory fades." When I finished, I turned off the lamp. The dark didn't scare me like it used to. It was honest. It didn't hide what the light sometimes refused to show. As I lay there, I thought about Ryan's voice, the way it had changed over the years, from laughter to control, from warmth to instruction. Somewhere between those versions, I'd lost the right to be his father and had become just an obstacle. That was the moral crack, right there. Not in the papers, not in the law, but in the space where love turned into permission. The next morning, I watched the sunrise over the ocean and whispered, "You taught me how to wait. Now I'll teach you what waiting can do." The lamp flickered once, then steadied again. The light stayed this time. I began to understand the rhythm of the place. Mornings were for waiting, afternoons were for remembering, and nights were for thinking. Thinking had become my new job, and like any job, I needed a plan. Each day I took my coffee to the back porch that faced the sea. The wind carried the smell of salt and rust from the old railing. June would come by with her usual smile, drop off a newspaper I rarely read, and ask if I needed anything. I'd tell her no. What I needed couldn't be brought on a tray. I started listening, to footsteps, to whispers, to the steady click of the receptionist's keyboard when she thought no one was watching. That's how I learned something useful. The nursing home kept a shared computer for residents to send emails or call family over video. "It helps people stay connected," June said. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the first tool I needed. That evening, when most of the others were asleep, I went to the common room. The computer was old, its fan wheezing softly like a tired heart. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. I opened the browser, searched my name, and followed the public trail of property filings. What I found wasn't shocking anymore, just confirmation. My name had vanished from everything I once owned. The last update was the day after I'd been admitted here. I printed nothing. Saved nothing. I just stared at the screen until the cursor blinked like a pulse. Then I wrote down one name. Hal Whitman, my old lawyer. The one I'd trusted back when I still believed trust could fix things. I didn't know if he was still alive, but his name was a place to start. The next morning I called the front desk and asked if they could help me send a letter. Of course, the nurse said. To who? An old friend, I told her. I wrote it slowly, my handwriting more fragile than I remembered. I didn't write about betrayal or property or anger. I wrote about truth, about the papers that had changed without consent, about a signature I didn't remember giving, and at the bottom, I added one line only Hal would understand. Check the light before it goes out. That phrase came from years ago, back when he'd helped me settle a small claim against a power company. It was code for look where no one else will. For the next few days, I waited. I kept quiet, kept my routine, kept pretending. George started asking questions. You're walking like a man with a secret, he said. I smiled. Maybe I am. Meanwhile, I watched the phone near the nurse's desk. Every call that came in, every list of names on sticky notes, they were patterns. Small, harmless ones. But they told me who visited, who called, and who didn't. Ryan's name was never there. Claire's neither. One afternoon, June mentioned the community radio station across the street. They broadcast the sunset hour every day, she said. Music, news, dedications, little pieces of hope. I asked if they ever let residents visit. She said sometimes, if we behaved. I laughed under my breath. I'll do my best to behave then. That radio tower became my new lighthouse. Each night I listened to it through the small speaker in my room. A man named Lou hosted a program called Voices at Dusk. He'd read letters from townsfolk, apologies, confessions, love notes never sent. There was something holy about it, the way strangers could heal each other without ever meeting. It gave me an idea. If the truth had been buried on paper, maybe it could be freed through a voice. Not shouted, not blamed, just told. I started drafting something in my notebook, a script of sorts. It wasn't for revenge, it was for balance, a way to make things even without breaking anything else. Late one night, Hal wrote back. June handed me the envelope like it was good news. Inside, one short message. Got your letter. You were right to write. Check your phone on Friday at noon. That Friday, I borrowed the landline from the nurse's desk. At exactly noon, it rang. Hal's voice came through. Older, rougher, but steady. I can't undo what's been filed, Robert, he said. But I can tell you this. The signatures were swapped. Someone used a power of attorney template and hid it inside a care contract. Can it be proven? Yes, if we can trace the original file. Then we trace it. He chuckled softly. You always were stubborn. No, I said. Just patient. When the call ended, I felt the sea breeze push through the open window. It carried the scent of salt and the faint buzz of the radio tower across the street. I held the bulb in my hand again, turned it slowly, and whispered, You were right, Mary. Every light has a switch. That night I made a list. Short, quiet, dangerous in its calmness. 1. Keep silent. 2. Gather proof. 3. Use the broadcast. The first 2 steps were simple. The third one would take something more, a kind of courage that doesn't come from anger, but from mercy. Because if this story was ever going to end right, the truth had to shine without burning anyone alive. When I turned off the lamp, the filament glowed for a second longer than usual. It reminded me that light doesn't disappear when you cut the power. It fades, softly, on its own terms. The first mistake they made came quietly, like everything else in this story. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day the sky couldn't commit to being sunny or sad. The residents were watching a movie in the lounge, something with laughter in it, but I stayed by the window, tracing the shape of the horizon. That's when June came over with the cordless phone. "You've got a call, Mr. Anderson. A woman named Claire." My hand hesitated before I took it. The air in the room seemed to narrow. Her voice came sharp through the static, sugar wrapped around metal. "Hi, Dad. Just checking in. How are they treating you there?" I almost smiled. It was the first time she'd called me Dad in months. I told her I was fine, that the staff were kind, that the food was edible. She laughed too quickly. "Good, good. Ryan's been meaning to visit, but he's been so busy. You understand." Busy. That word again. It used to mean ambition. Now it meant absence. Then she said something she shouldn't have. "The electric bill came in your name again. I thought we switched that. Can you call the company and fix it?" I stayed silent long enough for her to fill the air with nervous chatter. "It's just a formality, you know. We'll need to confirm your signature again." There it was, the crack in her polish. Too much control, not enough fear. "I'll look into it," I said, calm as stone. "Send the details to my room. I'll make sure it's done right." She hung up relieved, not realizing she'd just given me my next breadcrumb. That night, I asked June if the home still had a fax line. "For sending insurance forms," I told her. She nodded. I waited until the staff changed shifts and slipped into the office near the reception. The machine sat against the wall, blinking quietly, forgotten. I faxed Hal the electric statement number written in Claire's careless handwriting. By morning, he'd left a message on the voicemail. "Got it. There's something odd. Billing address never changed. The utilities still list you as the property owner." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The trap they built had a loose wire. 2 days later, June brought in the community radio host, Lou, for his weekly visit. He interviewed residents for the Sunset broadcast, asking them about small joys, first jobs, favorite songs, stories of forgiveness. I volunteered for the first time. "You've got a good voice for the air," Lou said after a test line. "Maybe we'll get you to read something next week." That was when the second mistake came, this time from Ryan. The following day, a staff member called out that I had visitors. My pulse skipped. But it wasn't Ryan walking through the door. It was a delivery man holding a sealed package. No note. Just my name, written in Claire's neat hand. Inside were old family photos, a box of tools, and a letter that said, "These were cluttering the attic. Thought you'd want them." But at the bottom of the box, taped under the lid, was a receipt. A purchase order for home surveillance installation, dated 2 days before they'd moved me here. The installer's name was printed in bold. I looked it up on the communal computer that night. An audio technician, same company Claire used for her podcast studio. That told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't just wanted the house. They'd wanted control of the story that lived inside it. So I started writing. Each night, after curfew, I sat under the dim lamplight and wrote the truth in my notebook. Not for the police, not for court, but for the radio. I began shaping it as a confession disguised as a memory, a story told by an old man learning to forgive. The air in the home shifted that week. People began to notice me differently. The nurses whispered. George grinned like he knew something. June brought extra coffee without being asked. Maybe they sensed that the silence around me had changed texture. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was waiting. Then came the last slip, the one they couldn't take back. The receptionist handed me an envelope on Friday. No return address. Inside was a voicemail transcription from the phone company. Claire had called to verify the transfer of services. Her words were sharp, rushed. "My father's not well. He probably doesn't remember signing." Just to prove it. That was the sentence that would undo them. I played it once, twice, a third time. Then I placed the recording beside the bulb on my table. The two things sat there. Light and evidence. Quiet, patient, ready. That night, Lou stopped by my room after the show. "You've got that story ready?" he asked. "Almost," I said. "Just waiting for the right frequency." He nodded, smiling at something he didn't yet understand. When it's ready, we'll air it. And for the first time since they'd left me here, I felt the tide turn. Not fast, not loud, but sure. The storm was forming, and I didn't need to lift a single hand to call it in. The days after the broadcast felt different. The sea outside my window no longer sounded like a wound. It breathed. People looked at me differently now. Not as the quiet old man in room 12, but as someone whose silence had weight. The staff walked softer around me. June brought my coffee before I asked. And even George, who rarely cared for anyone, began saving me a seat by the window. The world had shifted, just slightly, but enough. Then came the second wind of the plan. The part that didn't rely on anger, but on rhythm. I wasn't going to destroy Ryan and Claire. I was going to show them what truth looks like when it doesn't need to shout. Hal called again that Monday. He'd seen the broadcast replay online. It had spread faster than we expected. "You did more damage in 10 minutes of calm than most lawyers do in 10 years of noise," he said. "I didn't want damage," I told him. "I wanted daylight." He chuckled. "Well, daylight's bright enough to sting." That afternoon, I asked June for a typewriter. The home still had one, dusty, missing a ribbon cover. I told her I wanted to write letters for closure. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. I wrote to every neighbor I'd ever known, thanking them for years of kindness. I wrote to the town clerk, the veterans office, even the electric company. Every letter carried the same subtle truth. I had not transferred ownership of my house willingly. I didn't accuse. I simply clarified. By Thursday, whispers had begun to move through town. Someone called the local newspaper about the radio story. Someone else called the county clerk asking about that notary who'd died. Truth had a current of its own now. It was traveling, unforced. That evening, I sat in the lounge with George. The TV was on mute, showing a courtroom drama. He nodded toward it. "You think they'll come after you now?" "They won't have to," I said. "They'll come to me." He grinned. "You sneaky old light bulb." The next day, my prediction came true. Ryan showed up. He didn't call ahead. He just walked into the common room in a pressed shirt that didn't fit right. He looked older than I remembered, like guilt had aged him overnight. Claire stood behind him, quiet for once. The nurses watched from the hall, pretending not to. He sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unsaid years. Then he exhaled. "You went on the radio?" "I did." "You embarrassed us." "No," I said. "I described something that happened. If that embarrasses you, then maybe you're listening." Claire's eyes flicked to the window, away from mine. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "You don't understand, Dad. We didn't mean for it to go that far." I nodded. "That's what people say when they find the edge they thought didn't exist." He started to say more, but I lifted my hand. "Ryan, there's a recording. The one you and Claire made when you signed those papers. You left it on the house intercom. The technician saved it as part of his test log. It's stored in the system file. Hal has it." His face went pale. Claire whispered something sharp under her breath, a sound that cracked the air between them. I leaned back, letting the silence fill the space. "I'm not using it," I said. "But I want you to know it exists." Ryan blinked. "You're blackmailing us?" "No, I'm educating you." He didn't answer. The ocean outside pounded against the seawall like a slow drum. Finally, I stood. "You took my home," I said, my voice calm, even. "But that's not the part that hurt. The part that hurt is that you thought I'd stop being your father the moment you won." He swallowed hard. "What do you want, Dad?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the difference between us. I already have what I came for." When they left, June found me still sitting there. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, just letting the air clear. That night, the wind howled against the windows. I took out the bulb, polished it with a small cloth, and set it on the nightstand. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the final piece of my plan. Step 4. Give them light to walk back home. The next morning, I called Lou at the radio station. "I want to schedule one more broadcast," I said. "No confessions this time, just music." "What kind of music?" "Something that sounds like forgiveness," I said. "I'll send you the track." Hal helped me file a formal appeal for the deed transfer that same day. He attached the notary report, the audio evidence, and the broadcast transcript. "This will be enough," he said. "They'll either surrender it, or the court will." But by the time the documents reached the county office, something unexpected happened. Ryan sent his own letter to the clerk, voluntarily relinquishing ownership. He wrote that the property belonged to my father in spirit and deed. The clerk called me personally to confirm it. I didn't smile. I just felt the tension leave my shoulders like a tide going out. That evening, I told Lou to air the song. It played right as the sun dipped below the horizon. Soft, steady, the kind of tune Mary used to hum while washing dishes. The broadcast title read, "Light Back Home." I sat by the window in my room, the same lamp glowing beside me, and watched the reflection of the tower light dance across the waves. Somewhere, miles away, Ryan and Claire would hear it too. The trap I'd built wasn't meant to punish. It was meant to teach. And it worked. Not because they lost something, but because they finally saw what I'd never stopped holding. A piece of light that could still guide them home. The morning it happened, the town smelled like salt and rain. The kind of air that carries truth, whether you're ready or not. I woke earlier than usual. The halls were still dark, the nurses whispering behind half-closed doors, coffee brewing somewhere distant. I sat up, dressed slowly, and watched the horizon turn from pewter to gold. There was something different in that light. Cleaner, like the world had exhaled overnight. June knocked just as I tightened my shoes. "You've got a visitor," she said. "Two, actually." She didn't have to tell me who. When I walked into the common area, Ryan and Claire were waiting by the window. They looked out of place among the faded wallpaper and plastic plants, like two people who didn't know where to put their hands anymore. Claire's hair was tied back, her face pale. Ryan was holding a folder, the edges bent from being gripped too tightly. "Dad," he started. The word came out cracked, not rehearsed. "We wanted to explain." I raised a hand, calm, not cruel. "You already did. The papers did your explaining for you." Claire's eyes darted toward the floor. "We didn't think you'd take it this far." "You mean tell the truth?" I asked. "Truth doesn't need distance to travel. It just needs air." There was a moment of silence before June entered with Lou from the radio station. He was carrying a small recorder and a press badge clipped to his jacket. "We're running a feature," he said, nodding toward me. "Stories of community integrity. Robert here has something to share." Ryan's face tightened. "This isn't," I cut him off gently. "It's exactly what it needs to be." Lou set up the microphone on the table between us. The nurses gathered quietly near the door. George wheeled himself closer, pretending to read a magazine. Everyone in that room knew what was coming, even if they didn't know the shape of it. I took a deep breath. "There was a time," I began, "when my son and his wife believed that taking a man's house was the same as helping him. They used my trust as their currency. They signed their names over mine, thinking paper could replace decency. But I don't stand here to shame them. I stand here because silence, when left too long, turns into consent." Lou nodded for me to continue. I placed the small flash drive on the table. "This," I said, "is a recording, their own words. A mistake, perhaps, but one that tells the truth more clearly than I ever could." Ryan's hand twitched toward the drive, then stopped, his jaw clenched. Claire stared at the window, her reflection trembling against the glass. "I'm not giving this to the police," I said. "Hal already filed the paperwork, and the court will handle the rest. I'm giving this to you, Ryan, so you can decide how loud your apology needs to be." Lou looked from me to them, unsure if he should keep recording. I nodded once. "Keep it running," I said. "People should hear what grace sounds like when it's real." Ryan took a step forward, then another. He looked at the recorder, then at me. His voice was thin. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I said. "Not to me. To yourself." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The entire room held its breath. Finally, he spoke. "I thought we were helping you," he said quietly. "We told ourselves it was smart, that you couldn't manage things alone anymore. But that wasn't it. I was scared. Scared you'd live longer than my patience. Scared you'd keep reminding me who I used to be before I started measuring worth in square footage." Claire's face broke. She turned away, covering her mouth. Ryan took a seat, the folder dropping onto the floor beside him. "You don't have to forgive me," he said. "I wouldn't." "I already did," I said. "That's why we're here instead of court." He blinked. "Why?" "Because someone has to stop the echo," I said. "If not me, then who?" Lou ended the recording. The air in the room was heavy but not bitter, like rain that finally fell after too many dry days. George clapped once, soft but steady. The nurses followed. It wasn't applause. It was release. After they left, Lou pulled me aside. "You sure about not pressing charges?" "I'm sure," I said. "The law will sort the papers. I'll sort the hearts." He smiled in that way people do when they witness something they can't quite name. "You've turned forgiveness into performance art." "Not performance," I said. "Restoration." The next few days unfolded like ripples from a stone. The broadcast of our meeting aired in a special evening slot, titled "Light Back Home, A Family Conversation." The town listened, so did the county clerk, the local pastor, and the attorney who'd once notarized my will. They all called, not to pity me, to thank me. Meanwhile, the paperwork moved faster than I'd ever seen bureaucracy move. By the end of the week, the title to my house was back in my name. Hal handled the details. "You made believers out of bureaucrats," he joked. But it wasn't the title that mattered anymore. It was the moment I stood in front of that microphone and didn't tremble. The world had heard my truth, but it also heard something rarer. An old man refusing to hate his own blood. A few days later, Lou invited me back on air for a follow-up. "People want to know how it ends," he said. "It doesn't," I told him. "It just quiets." We sat in the booth again, the hum of the equipment steady behind us. He asked what forgiveness felt like. I looked out through the window at the pier lights reflecting on the waves and said, "It feels like breathing in after years of holding your breath." When the broadcast ended, he switched off the mic, but not the light. The bulb above us glowed warm and patient. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering the one waiting on my nightstand, the one with Mary's paint smudge. That night, back in my room, I took that old bulb, screwed it into the socket, and turned it on. The filament flared bright, steady, whole. Outside, lightning rolled far across the sea, but inside, the light held. Justice, I realized, wasn't thunder. It was the glow that stays after the storm has passed. I lay back, listening to the waves hit the shore, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep without fear of being left behind. Peace doesn't come like an announcement. It drifts in, soft and uninvited, until one day you notice the air feels lighter. After the broadcast, after the storm of questions and apologies and headlines that all faded as quickly as they came, the silence returned. But it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was the kind that made room for breathing. The nurses still called me Mr. Anderson, but their voices carried warmth now, not pity. George started joining me on morning walks down the boardwalk path behind the nursing home. His legs didn't work well, so he rolled beside me in his chair while I pushed gently, and we'd watch the sea trade colors with the sky. "You really did it, old man," he said one morning. The gulls squawking above. "You won." "I didn't win," I told him. "I just stopped losing." That line made him laugh. a deep, weathered laugh that filled the space between us. It had been a long time since either of us had heard that sound in our own throats. Ryan came for the first time a week later. He looked smaller than I remembered, the way men do when they're carrying shame instead of pride. He stood at the door with his hands in his pockets, shifting like a schoolboy who'd lost something he wasn't supposed to borrow. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded, motioning to the chair near the window. The ocean lay beyond the glass, restless and steady. For a long time, we didn't speak. I let him sit in the quiet until the silence became a truth of its own. "I heard the broadcast again," he said finally. "It's still online. People are talking about it." "I know," I said. "I get letters now, from strangers. They don't care about the house. They just care that someone said the thing they've been afraid to say." He rubbed his palms together, the sound rough against the fabric of his jeans. She's been going to therapy. She's working at the community center now. Art classes for seniors." "That's good," I said. He nodded, eyes still low. "I wanted to see you, to ask what happens next." I turned toward him. "Next, we build something different. Not out of guilt, out of clarity." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Boundaries," I said. "They're not walls. They're just fences with gates that swing one way until trust can handle both." He stared at me for a long time. "Do you forgive us, really?" "I forgave you the day I told the truth," I said. "Forgiveness isn't waiting for an apology. It's deciding to stop bleeding." He leaned back in the chair, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for months. The afternoon sun poured through the window blinds, striping the floor in bands of gold. He looked at them, then at me. "The house is yours again." "I know," I said. "Hal told me. But I'm not going back there." He blinked, surprised. "Why not?" "That house remembers too much," I said. "Every wall echoes. Some places don't heal. They just echo quieter. I don't want to live with echoes." He swallowed hard. "Then what should I do with it?" "Live in it," I said simply. "But not as an owner, as a keeper. Treat it like borrowed light. Fill it with something good. And if you ever sell it, don't sell it for profit. Give it to someone who needs to start over." "That's the deal." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You'd trust me with that?" "I'm trusting the man who came here without a folder," I said, "not the one who brought paperwork to a father's bedside." He laughed quietly, tired, but real. "You always did know how to talk in riddles." "They're not riddles," I said. "They're reminders." The next week, Claire came, alone. She didn't say much, just handed me a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. When I unwrapped it, I saw the ocean painted in thick strokes of blue and white, and in the corner, almost hidden, a house standing under a single beam of light. The title on the back read, "He Left the Lamp On." "It's beautiful," I said. "It's what you did," she whispered. I placed the painting on the nightstand beside the old bulb with Mary's smudge. The two lights, painted and real, seemed to speak to each other. As weeks turned into months, life found rhythm again. I joined Lou at the radio station every Thursday. Together, we read letters from listeners, stories about regret, lost siblings, old lovers finding each other again at church bazaars. Some nights, I shared short reflections between songs. I never used names, never gave details, just lessons learned in the quiet. Sometimes the loudest truth is the one you whisper to yourself. Listeners began sending letters addressed simply to Robert Ray, the father who waited. Lou kept them in a shoebox under the console. "You've become a myth, you know," he joked. "The saint of slow justice." I smiled. Saints don't live by the ocean. They'd rust. Back at the nursing home, I started tending the small courtyard garden with June. We planted daisies, lavender, and rosemary, the kind Mary used to tie into bundles for the kitchen. I'd forgotten how good earth smelled when you forgave it for being dirt. Every sunset, I'd sit by my window and write in my notebook. Not about loss anymore, but about lessons. Peace is the art of staying full while giving away your light. Or you can't rebuild trust with the same wood that burned the bridge. Start with new lumber. Sometimes I'd fall asleep mid-sentence, the pen slipping from my hand. June found me like that one night and chuckled softly. "You write like a man who's building something invisible." "Maybe I am," I said. "A bridge no one else can see yet." When Ryan visited again, months later, he brought news. "We fixed the porch," he said. "Rewired the kitchen lights. Painted the fence white like Mom liked." He paused. "It feels different now. Softer." I smiled. "Houses can change if the people inside do." He handed me a photo. The house glowed under a string of warm bulbs. One of them, the one above the porch, had a small chip of paint, red and uneven. Mary's mark. My mark. For a while we sat together, father and son, the years between us finally quiet. I didn't need to say I was proud. He didn't need to ask for permission to begin again. When he left, the sky outside turned lavender. I turned on my lamp and watched its reflection merge with the fading sun. The glass bulb held steady light. No flicker, no doubt, just calm. That's when I realized peace doesn't erase distance. It gives it shape. It's not about letting people back in. It's about standing far enough away that love can breathe again. I closed my notebook, whispering the last line I'd written earlier that day. Boundaries are love in slow motion. And as the ocean roared softly below, I knew the sound wasn't lonely anymore. It was alive. It was forgiveness, still moving, still making room for whatever came next. Healing rarely looks like the stories tell it. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or some sudden burst of laughter. It comes quietly, in cups of coffee poured for someone you once couldn't speak to, in mornings where the air no longer feels heavy, in the way a name finally stops burning when you say it out loud. It had been 6 months since the broadcast, and the rhythm of life had settled into something gentle. The nursing home had become less of a waiting room and more of a place that listened. The nurses no longer whispered when I passed. They waved. June still saved me a seat by the window every morning, where the sunlight painted soft rectangles on the floor. I'd sip my coffee and write small reflections, one each day. Not sermons, not advice, just small truths. On my 66th birthday, Lou surprised me. "You're not getting away with peace and quiet today," he said, bursting into my room with a grin. Behind him came half the staff, carrying a cake that looked far too big for such a small group. Someone had written "Lightkeeper" across it in blue frosting. George wheeled in, wearing a paper party hat that kept slipping off. "Don't look so modest," he said. "You're the most famous man in town who still irons his own shirts." We all laughed, and for a moment, I let myself just exist. Not as a man betrayed, not as someone proving a point, but simply as part of something still good. Halfway through the celebration, June stepped forward, holding a small envelope. "This came in the mail this morning," she said. "Return address looks familiar." I didn't have to open it to know. The handwriting was Ryan's, still neat, still tense around the edges. I slipped the letter from its envelope. Inside was a photograph of the old house, now freshly painted, with flower boxes under the windows and a swing on the porch. Mary's wind chime hung in the corner, its silver bells catching sunlight. Below the photo was a note in Ryan's handwriting. "The house feels alive again. We wanted you to see it. There's dinner next Friday, sunset. No cameras, no audience, just family. Claire made your favorite, pot roast and peach cobbler. We'd like you to come home, Dad. No signatures this time, just supper." The room fell quiet around me. Even Lou, who was never without a comment, stayed still. I folded the letter, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Not heavy, but real. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the tide pull itself across the sand. Forgiveness had been my choice for months, but this was something deeper. This was re-entry. It's one thing to forgive, it's another to walk back into the house where everything broke. I turned on my lamp, the old bulb still humming, steady as ever, and whispered to it, "Do I go?" The filament glowed warm, unwavering. Light doesn't answer in words, but sometimes it tells you enough. Friday came with a sky painted in gold and coral. Lou insisted on driving me. "Some stories deserve an ending," he said. I didn't argue. The drive took less than 20 minutes, though it felt like crossing time itself. When the house came into view, I almost didn't recognize it. The shutters were new, the porch rails white and the garden alive with roses. A soft breeze moved through the chimes, Mary's chimes, scattering their song like forgiveness itself. Ryan opened the door before I knocked. His eyes were tired but peaceful. Claire stood beside him, hands clasped. For a second, none of us knew what to do. Then she stepped forward and said, "Dinner's getting cold." Inside, the smell hit me. Roasted meat, thyme, warm bread, and the faint sweetness of peaches. It was almost too much, that ordinary kindness. We ate quietly at first, the three of us. Forks clinked against plates, chairs creaked, and in between, silence wove itself softly through the air. Then Ryan spoke. "I had a dream a few weeks ago," he said. "You were fixing the porch light. I asked if you needed help and you said, 'It's not broken, it just forgot how to shine.'" I smiled faintly. Maybe it was waiting for company. Claire reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. "We can't undo what we did," she said. "But we want to build something honest. You don't have to live here, just don't shut the door forever." I looked at her hand resting near mine, and for a moment, I saw her not as the woman who took my house, but as the daughter I never really had. Scared, flawed, trying. I placed my hand gently over hers. "The door was never locked," I said. "You just forgot it swings both ways." Ryan's eyes glistened. He nodded, his shoulders finally unclenching. After dinner, I walked to the porch. The sun was melting into the sea, and the light from the tower blinked slowly, steady, like a heartbeat. I felt them both step outside behind me. Claire handed me a small box. Inside was the old light bulb, the one from my room, Mary's smudge still faint along its glass. "You left it," she said. "We thought maybe it belonged here again." I held it carefully, the glass warm from her hands. Then I screwed it back into its socket above the porch. It flickered once, twice, and then glowed. Strong, calm, unflinching. The three of us stood there in its light, listening to the chimes whisper over the waves. No words left to fix, no past left to dissect, just breath and warmth and something whole. Ryan took a step closer. "You're staying for dessert, right?" I smiled. "Only if you promise not to sign me up for the mortgage." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that carried years away. As night settled, I sat back on the porch swing, watching the bulb hold its steady glow. Inside, their voices blended with the hum of the house. I thought about Mary, about everything she used to say about grace, that it's not about forgetting, it's about continuing. The ocean roared softly beyond the dunes, not angry, just alive. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't a bridge we crossed once. It was a road we keep walking, every day, choosing not to turn back. When I finally rose to leave, Ryan and Claire walked me to the car. Ryan hugged me, not the quick, polite kind, but a quiet one, like two men who finally understood each other. As Lou drove us back toward the nursing home, the porch light disappeared into the horizon, glowing like a promise that no longer needed words. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man returning from exile. I felt like a father coming home, not to a place but to peace itself. A year passed before I realized how much had changed. Seasons rolled through the coastal town like slow tides, gentle but certain. The nursing home garden bloomed wider than ever, Lavender, mint, daisies all reaching toward the same forgiving sun. June said the residents called it the healing yard. I told her it wasn't the plants that healed them. It was what they whispered to, day after day. Every morning, I woke to the same rhythm. The sea breathing against the dunes, gulls calling out over the surf, the soft hum of the light bulb on my nightstand. That old bulb, Mary's smudge still faint near its base, had followed me through the storm. Now it glowed without flicker, just quiet strength. Lou still picked me up every Thursday for the radio segment. We'd sit in that small booth by the pier, the scent of salt and coffee mixed in the air. The program had changed names. It was now The Light Table, a show about second chances. People sent in stories of healing, and I read them in that same calm tone that once carried my pain. I didn't tell my story anymore. It had already found its ending. Sometimes, though, Lou would ask, "Ever think about what happened a year ago?" I'd smile. Not about the betrayal, but about what came after. Because the after was where the light lived. Ryan and Claire came by every few weeks now, not out of guilt, but habit. The first time they visited after the dinner, they brought me a small wooden box. Inside was the old house key, polished and tied with a red ribbon. "We don't need it anymore," Ryan said. "The door is always open, but you don't have to walk through it to be home." I kept the key on my nightstand beside the lamp. Sometimes, when the ocean grew wild at night, I'd reach out and hold it just to remind myself that forgiveness wasn't a surrender. It was ownership of peace. Claire had started her own art studio, Harbor Light. She invited me to its opening that spring. The walls were lined with paintings from local seniors. Bright skies, family portraits, abstract storms that ended in color. In the center hung the same painting she'd given me months ago. He left the lamp on. Beneath it, she'd placed a small brass plaque that read, "Dedicated to Robert Anderson, who taught us that light never retires." I didn't cry. I just stood there for a while, hand over my heart, feeling something like gratitude humming through my ribs. That evening, Ryan drove me back to the home. We didn't talk much. Words had done enough. When we reached the front gate, he said quietly, "You know, the house feels different since that night. It's warmer. Claire says it's because the ghosts finally left." "Maybe they didn't leave," I said. "Maybe they forgave us too." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes when a man stops defending his past. Then he looked toward the sea and said, "Thanks for leaving the lamp on." That night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled across my room, painting silver stripes across the floor. I picked up my notebook and wrote one final line. "Forgiveness isn't the end of pain. It's the beginning of peace." The next morning, I sat with June in the courtyard. The air smelled of rosemary and fresh soil. She poured tea and said, "You seem quieter lately." "I think I've run out of noise," I told her. She smiled. "That's a good thing, right?" "It's everything." Later that afternoon, Lou aired the last story I'd recorded before the anniversary. It wasn't about me, not directly. It was about a father who once lost everything, but chose to rebuild with silence instead of revenge. When the story ended, Lou added a line I hadn't written. "Sometimes, peace isn't found in forgetting, but in remembering without pain." I sat by the window, the light spilling in, and listened to my own voice fade into the static. The reflection in the glass looked older but softer, like a man who'd stopped arguing with time. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The wind carried the smell of salt and wet wood. The sky was bleeding gold into the water, and the waves lapped softly against my shoes. Out in the distance, I could see the house, its porch light still burning steady. The glow reached the edge of the tide, trembling faintly, but alive. I stood there for a long time, watching the line where the sea met the light. My hands were in my pockets, the key warm against my palm. A young couple walked by, holding hands, their laughter cutting through the sound of the surf. I smiled at them, remembering when life was that simple, and realizing that in some quiet way, it still was. I took a breath, long and slow. Peace isn't forgetting, I whispered. It's understanding. The wind answered with a hush, like the sea agreeing, and as I turned back toward the home, the horizon glowed behind me, the light steady, the path clear, the air full of quiet forgiveness. If this story reminded you that peace can grow again, even after betrayal, share your thoughts below. And if you believe silence can still lead to truth and love, subscribe for more stories like this. The lamp by the window stayed on that night, shining softly into the dark. It wasn't there to push the darkness away. It was there to prove the light still remembered how to stay.